Now, the second area that we were looking at was regulating dissolutions of Parliament. So what is the theoretical rationale for Parliament playing a role in controlling when Parliament gets dissolved? Yeah. So the prerogative or executive power to dissolve Parliament is seen as providing the incumbent PM an unjustified incumbency advantage. Why should he or she be able to choose the time to dissolve Parliament at a time that perhaps could coincide with his or her period of greater popularity, but at the same time, if he or she wants to avoid a negative issue from impacting the elections, yeah? But there are other more practical reasons for having more regular and fixed election dates. The prerogative system of dissolution confers disproportionate power, especially in the context of a minority government or even a multi-party government. And as many people are predicting, that is what lies in store for Malaysia in the coming election, at least, if not in subsequent elections. Yeah. So if we have a minority or majority government, giving the power to dissolve Parliament to a PM who does not control a majority in the House is seen to be a disproportionate advantage. In terms of other practical factors, a fixed-term parliament improves the viability of coalition governments and governments dependent on CSAs. Because if you have a fixed-term understanding, parties feel more secure in their arrangements, whether it's CSA arrangements or coalition arrangements, and therefore it lessens the risk of frequent opportunistic elections. But fixed election cycles also improve policymaking as a whole, because it offers more certainty for civil service, more certainty for electoral administration planning, and even from a party perspective, a more predictable operational timeline. So in the study, I looked primarily at two different forms of fixed-term laws. One is the present system in the UK, which is actually undergoing a complete overhaul. So the UK has a system called the Fixturn Parliament Act, which basically fixes the term of Parliament, but allows Parliament to be dissolved early with a resolution from Parliament to allow that to happen. So the necessary threshold is 2/3 majority of MPs have to agree for it to happen. Now, the other thing that the FTPA does is that it gets rid of the monarch's reserve power for dissolution. So the monarch in the UK at this point in time, although I think it's going to change and be reversed, at this point in time, the Queen does not have the power to dissolve Parliament. Now, has it worked? Yes, it has. The FTPA has, in one sense, worked in that it has given control back to Parliament to decide on the date of an election, or at least to have a say in it. But it hasn't meant that parliaments are now sitting full term. Yeah, we've seen a lot of snap elections in the UK in recent years, but of course that is tied more into Brexit than instability in the process itself. Yeah. Okay, so moving on now to Canada. Canada's system is slightly different. In Canada's system, they have fixed dates for their elections. They preserved the discretion or the reserve power of the head of state to dissolve Parliament. Yeah. And because of the preservation of the head of state's power to dissolve Parliament, and because there are no other stops on the Prime Minister, preventing the Prime Minister from asking for a dissolution of Parliament, we have seen that their fixed term laws actually doesn't really work that well. Yeah. So this probably is not a model that's suitable here. Right. So coming now to the recommendations. So given all of this, what then is the best path forward for Malaysia? In my view, there are 5 crucial steps that we should take, 5 different aspects. The first is, of course, the hardest, which is building political consensus on principles relating to government formation. Now, I'll go into more depth in the next slide. The second is to introduce a parliamentary investiture vote. Third is to introduce, or rather to codify, a parliamentary no confidence mechanism. Third, to have Parliament involved in regulating its own dissolution. And fifth is to curtail indiscriminate party hopping. I won't go into this in detail because there's an excellent study, of course, by Professor Wong Chin Huat on this, which Percy has published. Right, so my first recommendation about building a consensus on principles of government formation. This is, of course, going to be difficult to do, yeah? Because as I said earlier, the Malaysian case studies demonstrate that our political actors don't abide by a clear set of principles and protocols. And because of that, it has led to acute instability. Now, as I also said earlier, it is difficult to capture these principles in a constitution. You can't capture all of it, yeah, because so much of it is left to convention. So it is time, however, because of the stability of our political system will continue to be under threat if we don't change something. It is time for political parties, either individually or working together, to come to the table and negotiate an understanding on this. There are other ways in which we can sort of create a consensus, one of which, of course, is through the development of a cabinet manual, as they've done in other countries like the UK and New Zealand, and to some extent in Canada. But apart from these, other ways of capturing the core principles and protocols, what we need to rely on, at least in the short term, pending maturity in our political system, is to strengthen the other mechanisms that I spoke about, which is the confidence mechanisms. Yeah. So I have put up here, I've taken this extract from my report. What then do I mean by core principles and protocols? So essentially, the principles and protocols should capture the central constitutional and conventional requirements that are best practices in Westminster parliaments. So number one, the core issue, of course, for any appointment is that the Prime Minister must have the ability and continue to retain the ability to win or to command the confidence of a majority of MPs of the Dewan Rakyat. But the second very important principle is that the Agong, or any head of state, should not be drawn into party politics. And so it is the responsibility of the political parties to seek, determine, and communicate to the Agong their resolution, yeah, where there are leadership crises. Now, the core principles should also set out principles and protocols for different situations. One is where Parliament has an overall majority in the Dewan Rakyat. Second, where the government has no overall majority in the Dewan Rakyat, then what do you do? And thirdly, what happens when there is a midstream change of Prime Minister? Yeah. Again, I won't go into all of these specifics right now, because I think it's perhaps more important at this point to discuss the confidence mechanisms and the investiture vote. Sorry. Okay. So when we talk about developing an investiture vote or a confidence mechanism, what do we mean? So let's look first of all at the current system. So in our current system, post-election appointment of PM, this is essentially two steps, right? Election happens, the PM or CM is appointed by head of state. What we're proposing is to introduce a second step, which is an investiture vote. Now, what about between an election? So if after an election, between two elections, a PM or a CM is dismissed, or someone challenges the incumbent. The current system, again, challenge to incumbent A by contender B gets resolved again at the level of the head of state. Yeah, either dismissal of A and appointment of B, or A is retained, B is dismissed. Yeah, B's claim is dismissed. What are we proposing? Stopgap. So in between, yeah, the contenders, nothing to do with the head of state, the politicians should be going to their legislative body to get a vote of confidence in A, sorry, a vote of no confidence in A, and or a vote of confidence in B. And following the confirmation by the head of state of whoever has the majority, there is another investiture vote, yeah, to confirm the process. So that's roughly an overview of the recommendations in relation to investiture votes and confidence. But two other aspects. This is also tied into the recommendations on the regulation of the dissolution of the legislative house. Yeah. So laws can be created that while vote of confidence is happening in a legislative body, that no prorogation or dissolution of that legislative body can occur. And secondly, obviously, that if there is a dispute and incumbent A is facing a challenge to his confidence mandate, then a type of fixed term election laws, which I'm proposing here, could be used to prevent incumbent A from asking for a dissolution for a snap election. Okay, so another chart, because I think it might be easier to sort of scheme out how confidence and no confidence votes work. So we have two possible outcomes, right? One is if a PM, after appointment, fails to win an investiture vote in the Legislative House. Second, if a vote of no confidence is passed against the PM or the CM. Now, if this happens, we can have three outcomes. first outcome, and I'll start from the bottom, the incumbent PM seeks to repropose himself, right? Perhaps he or she is able to negotiate with more parties and win the confidence back again. Secondly, and this is the top one, there may be an alternative PM who wishes to propose him or herself to take over. There is a third option, which is that the House is in such a disarray that no clear majority of parties can form a government, and it is time, therefore, to dissolve the House. So three possible situations, what happens under the proposed mechanism that I'm suggesting. Now, if no one challenges a vote of no confidence, then the incumbent PM should advise the head of state to dissolve Parliament. But if an alternative PM is proposed, then a vote of confidence is proposed in that alternative PM. Two likely outcomes, either that vote passes or it fails. And or the incumbent PM could also say, I now have the confidence, I've won back the confidence, put forward a vote of confidence in him or herself with two potential outcomes. Again, either the vote of confidence fails or it passes. Now, if for the incumbent PM, the vote of confidence passes, it will also automatically mean, that if there is an alternative vote of confidence in an alternative PM, that would fail. So then the incumbent PM continues. No questions, no issues. On the other hand, if the alternative PM who's been proposed wins his or her vote of confidence, then prima facie that new PM should go forward now and seek appointment from the head of state. But what happens if both alternatives, either the incumbent PM or the alternative PM, fail? Then, of course, it goes to a dissolution of Parliament. So this is generally the scheme. So I've taken a lot of time. I hope Chow Ying will indulge me just to cover a few more slides.
Yes, please go ahead, Maha. Yeah.
So now let's talk in detail about the process that I'm suggesting. The process and the procedures, because these are also important. Now, the key thing is with the confidence procedures, whether it's investiture procedure or confidence mechanism, it needs to be codified. And by codified, I mean that we need to set it up in statute. So there has to be in statute provisions that give Parliament and MPs the power to bring these votes forward. And part of that, complementing that, the standing orders should very clearly set out the process and the procedure for these votes. Now, it is very important in my view that the codified rules and laws should cover as much of the aspects of the process and procedure as possible, with very little left to either the Speaker or the Secretary of the House to use their discretion on, because we cannot escape the fact that both the Speaker and the Secretary, by the nature of their offices, are political appointees. Now, I'm suggesting that the traditional votes, which are regarded as confidence votes in Westminster Parliament, such as the votes on the budget, the second reading and third reading of the budget, votes in relation to the Agong speech, although I don't think we see it that way in Malaysia, I do think that the traditional conventions should still be retained. Right, so looking at investiture votes, in terms of process, as I said earlier, it should be conducted for every newly appointed PM. What is the rationale for it? The PM is accountable to the Dewan Rakyat for the representation that she made to the Agong, that she had the confidence of the majority of members. So the accountability structure is not the Agong being accountable to the Parliament, but it is the appointed PM being accountable to Parliament. The vote should take place at the first sitting. So this has to be clearly and expressly included in the rules. It should take place in the first sitting after the appointment, and it should be included in the standing order of business after the taking of oaths by MPs. In my view, the investiture vote should require an absolute majority because that is in line with Article 43 of the Federal Constitution. If the PM loses an investiture vote, that should be treated as a no confidence vote, and she should resign if she wishes to, or proceed to try and win back the confidence of the House through a vote of confidence. Now, in terms of the constructive vote of no confidence, the specific elements which are important to include is that every MP should be given the entitlement to bring a vote of no confidence in the incumbent PM and a subsequent confidence vote in any PM to replace the, in any MP to replace the PM. But of course, because this could result in frivolous motions being put forward on a daily basis, there are restrictions that can be put in place, which I'll discuss shortly. So in terms of the process, the notice period for motion should not be more than 7 days. And of course, the leader of the opposition should have the privilege of being able to put forward a motion of no confidence with 1 day's notice. Now, to control the bringing of frivolous motions, a threshold number of MPs can be required to express support for the motion in order for it to be accepted. I have suggested 26, which is the quorum, the current quorum of the Dewan Rakyat. Of course, the standing orders and even the statute that I spoke of should provide that no confidence motions must be given precedence over government business. And again, as I said earlier, a no confidence vote should, in my view, require an absolute majority. A few more points. Now, if a no confidence is passed, or if investiture fails, then as I described earlier, a confidence motion can be brought. And once again, the confidence motion, there should be a very strict fixed time limit set in the rules between the no confidence vote or the failure of the investiture vote and the confidence vote. I have suggested 3 days, and this is because we don't want to prolong any state of instability in government. So within 3 days, parties should resolve the leadership dispute. And again, because of its crucial nature and its vital role, confidence motions should be allowed to be submitted with no more than 1 day's notice on the basis of public interest. And of course, they should be given precedence over all other business. Once again, for the same reasons, I believe that the vote should require an absolute majority to pass. Right, so just 2 more slides now. Statutory regulation of dissolution. So my proposal, as I've touched on in the previous topics, is to regulate the incumbent PM's powers regarding dissolution without limiting the head of state's reserve powers. Now, what is my rationale for this? It is interesting that in our system, the PM has actually no express constitutional entitlement to request or advise the head of state to dissolve parliament. Yeah, he or she must, if they have lost confidence, either resign or request that the head of state dissolve parliament. But apart from that, when there's no issue of loss of confidence, there's no express constitutional provision that allows the Prime Minister to either advise the Agong to dissolve Parliament, which many say he cannot do, or to request a dissolution of Parliament. Yeah. So on that basis, running on that basis, my view is that if we were to enact fixed term laws, a type of fixed term laws, it wouldn't be contrary to the Constitution. So through statute, a PM could be required to obtain a resolution from the Dewan Rakyat before she could request or advise the Agong to dissolve Parliament for a snap election. The laws should equally enable any MP to bring a motion directly to Parliament to request the PM to so advise the Agong. Now, the Act must specifically preserve the Agong's reserve powers in terms of dissolution. So the ultimate decision is still the Agong's. Yeah? In my view, these motions can be either simple or absolute majority. And obviously rules relating to the notice period for such motions, the prioritization of such motions, and the voting majority should all be expressly set out in the standing rules, in the standing orders. Now, 3 other points. The laws regulating the PM's powers regarding dissolution can also be used to protect and facilitate the confidence procedure. I touched on those 2 aspects when we looked at the diagram. So the 2 aspects are this, that the laws can stipulate that if a no confidence vote is passed or if an investiture vote fails and no further motion of confidence is brought in another MP, right, within the span of 3 days, then in the diagram flow, the flow chart that I provided, what should happen is automatically the incumbent PM should go and seek an audience with the head of state to request a dissolution. But if the incumbent PM refuses to do so, then the Act should allow any MP to essentially force the PM's hand. Yeah. Now, the laws can also require that after a motion of no confidence is passed or an investiture vote fails, in order to give the Dewan Rakyat the 3-day window to see if they can appoint a new PM, the incumbent PM can be prevented from either advising the Agong to prorogue Parliament or to adjourn the Dewan Rakyat. Right, so that's my presentation. Thank you for indulging me for an extra 10 minutes, everyone.